Tonight on our Viking European Sojourn cruise, the cruise director provided us a presentation on Dracula. He's from the Transylvania region, so he wanted to talk about the history and here's his presentation.
Well, so what came to your mind when you thought about Transylvania, when you booked this cruise and you saw that there is an option, you know, to go to Transylvania, right? Most probably you thought about mountains of savage beauty, right? You thought about ancient castles, about werewolves and witches, right? A land of magical obscurity, right? Transylvania, the mysterious land best known for the bloodthirsty vampires, you know, and howling wolves. And what you have discovered there, it is that Transylvania is definitely more than that, right? Transylvania, those of you that went to Brasov and to visit Dracula's castle, they have discovered that Transylvania is a region, right, that is part of Romania nowadays. It used to be a self-standing principality. The name comes from Latin and means the lands beyond the forest. Why? Because as you can see on the map over there, Transylvania is exactly the area, you know, that is surrounded by the Carpathian Mountains, you know, that are going from the northeastern part of Romania all around to southwest of Romania. So this area here is Transylvania, right? Not only the circle that you can see marked with red over there on the map, that's the town of Brasov and Dracula's castle, the Bran castle, but all this area here is Transylvania. So it is the region beyond the forest, right? Well, some of you have visited the castle of the so-called Dracula's castle. Why is it called Dracula's castle? And probably you're totally confused now, because you have, well, they changed their approach over there at the castle and made it more vampire-y. And you saw all these flags with bats, you know, when you walked up that road to the castle, and the guides showed most probably the bed in which Dracula, the Vlad the Impaler, used to sleep, right? Is it? Well, this is only for touristical purposes and advertising. Nothing to do with Dracula, other than the fact that this former border fortification, medieval border fortification, looks similar to how Bram Stoker described in his novel Dracula's Castle, right? Some believe that Vlad the Impaler spent a night over or so in a castle when he was imprisoned and captured by the Hungarian king Matthias Corvinus, and on his way to Budapest from Wallachia he spent a night over in that castle, but there are no documents that would attest this night over that Vlad the Impaler would have spent in the Dracula's castle. Well, it is going to be this blend of facts. Vlad the Impaler, a 15th century voivode, the prince of the Principality of Wallachia that was born in Transylvania, and fiction, right? The Count Dracula, an imagined creature. This is what we're going to explore during this presentation. And we're going to look at the legends of vampires and some of the earliest and most famous depictions of vampires in novels, in movies. And then we talk also a little bit about the historical facts that are related to Vlad the Impaler, the so-called Dracula, the vampire of Transylvania, that is worldwide renowned for the fact that well, he was sucking blood over there. And this is the reason for which we are using so much garlic in the Romanian cuisine. Well, for centuries, ladies and gentlemen, cultures throughout the entire world have actually created and celebrated and feared demons, spirits and evil creatures that would feast on human flesh or blood. Right? In the 5th and the 6th century BC, right, before Christ, in ancient India, images of the Hindu goddess Kali that you can see in the picture over there was portraying her drenched in blood and having a red tongue, as you can see here on the picture, carrying a bowl of blood in one of her forearms. All of them, the Mesopotamians, the ancient Greeks, the Indians, as well as the Chinese, they all had tales of demons, of spirits, and of the undead. Well, vampire stories entered Eastern Europe, ladies and gentlemen, by the way of Romas, right? The gypsies, which were people from India that were brought by the Mongols in 1241 when the Mongols attacked Europe. So they brought 80,000, no, it was more than that, 80, I don't know exactly how many gypsies they enslaved on the way to Europe, but then after they've been defeated just in front of Vienna, they turned back and they released about 30,000 gypsies on Romas on the territory of Hungary nowadays, and about 80,000 of them, they released them on the territory of what is Romania nowadays, Transylvania and the southern part, right? So this is why the largest communities of Romas are in these countries, in Romania and in Hungary. So these Romas that were actually people that the Mongolians, the Tartars brought with them and captured and enslaved on their wave of attack in Europe, they were mistaken by the locals here in Europe as Egyptians. This is why they were called commonly gypsies, right? Well, these Romas, they believed in Kali, the goddess, the Indian goddess that just showed in the previous picture, and they also believed in beings that were called mulo, right? Which were malicious undead people who would suck the blood of the living people, right? So here comes the story already. Well, stories and superstitions about vampires were soon spreading throughout entire Eastern Europe. In Transylvania, for instance, it was believed that vampires were said to have long fingernails. Then in Bulgaria, it was believed that vampires would have only a nostril, right? And then in Bavaria, right, in nowadays Germany, it was believed that they would sleep with one eye open, right? Many superstitions, many stories. The name vampire actually reflects this geographical spread because vampire, the word itself is of a Slavic origin, right? It belongs to the Slavic language. But there were more than stories actually, because people believed vampires were real and they began to panic. And authorities of the 16th century, or 18th century, pardon me, documented the case of a Serbian peasant who died in 1725, and the villagers, right, his compatriots, they believed that he became a vampire and after his death, and that he killed 9 people, right, after he was buried. So of course they opened the grave, you know, and then they stabbed his heart with a stake. Yes, and then there were reports published about these events in Western Europe, and then very soon another similar vampire incident followed. This time it was a Serbian soldier that also died, and the villagers from the village that he belonged to and where he was buried, they also thought that he became a vampire and that he killed 16 people after he was buried. Well, these cases, ladies and gentlemen, they spread a wave of, I can call it a vampire panic throughout entire Europe, not only Eastern Europe but also Western Europe. And the hysteria that started in Eastern Europe soon expanded, like I said, throughout the entire Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And it ranged, this hysteria ranged for a generation, and it became known as the 18th century vampire controversy. During this time, graves were dug up and corpses had stakes driven through their heart just to make sure that the undead would not rise again and kill other people. Bodies were decapitated. And the craze did not stop until the Austrian Empress Maria Theresa sent her personal physician, her personal doctor, to investigate. The doctor, of course, concluded that there are no vampires and these vampires do not exist. And then there were laws that were passed that banned the opening of graves and the desecration of dead bodies, right, throughout the entire empire. Well, modern scholars now believe, ladies and gentlemen, that this hysteria was caused in part by the lack of knowledge of the common people of how the human body decomposes, right? And what were viewed as signs of being a vampire, right? It was actually the decomposition of the body, and it was the after that hair and nail growth that made the people think that these bodies, these corpses would be vampires. Well, let us now also look, ladies and gentlemen, to the first depictions of vampires, because we heard about the hysteria that started. It lasted for a generation, so it was then strong already. It got roots into the subconscious, the community subconscious of Eastern Europe as well as Western Europe. Well, it is not surprisingly, you know, that this fascination with vampires in the 1700s led a number of German poets to create works with vampire themes. And the first fictional stories about vampires were written, actually, though it was written, there is one story that was written by Lord Byron in 1819, an English author. And he wrote an unfinished horror story that was called Fragment of a Novel, that was then later on reworked by Byron's own personal physician, John William Polidori, who created a novel that was called The Vampire and was released also the same year in 1819. This romantic work was definitely a huge success, and it is the most influential vampire work of the early 19th century. And then another successful vampire-themed work was written by the Irish writer Sheridan Le Fanu, who wrote Carmilla, that was published in 1872, and these two novels were actually provided the Irish author Bram Stoker with the inspiration to create what was then to become the most famous of the vampires, Count Dracula from Transylvania. Well, born in Ireland, Bram Stoker, ladies and gentlemen, first began writing for the Dublin Evening Mail, and then he moved to London, where he began writing Gothic horror stories. And Dracula, Count Dracula, was actually Bram Stoker's second work, and it was published in 1897. Well, the novel got the readers in fascination, or brought fascination right away, by placing the action in the backward parts of the European continent. Well, compared with Western Europe, ladies and gentlemen, the Balkans, Eastern Europe, right? Romania also belongs more or less to the Balkan countries, or Transylvania. These areas were less developed economically, you know, and less urban than the rest of the western part of Europe, and therefore they were perceived as being mysterious and unexplored. So although Bram Stoker, as you probably have heard already from the guides in Romania, he was never himself traveling to Transylvania, so he'd never been there in that area, but he did some research, and he researched folk tales, and he researched accounts of vampires, all these accounts that published during this hysteria, you know, of the 18th century. So he opened his novel with a journey back to a more primitive, a more strange world, as Jonathan Harker traveled from London to the Count's Castle in Transylvania in the Carpathian Mountains. But later on, ladies and gentlemen, the vampires were used to express social anxieties at the end of the First World War. The darker side of the human psyche became a theme in horror movies that attracted quite large audiences. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is a silent horror movie that was released in 1920, became one of the most influential films of the German Expressionist movement, and it is considered to be one of the greatest silent horror movies ever directed, ever released. Well, Dracula then was portrayed again in movies in 1931 by an actor who definitely created the definitive portrait and became nearly synonymous with the role of Count Dracula. The name of this gentleman is Bela Ferenc Dezső Blasco, and he is a Hungarian, or he was a Hungarian from Transylvania, born in the city of Lugos in Transylvania, who began his acting career in Hungary, but he was very soon banned over there due to his union activism. Then he emigrated to the States, and then he adopted over there a stage name based on the name of his own town. So this is why you know him or remember him as Bela Lugosi. Lugosi comes from the town of Lugos, is the name of his town where he was born and where he grew up. Well, he first played actually the Dracula role on Broadway in a stage production before having been chosen to play the role in the Dracula movie. Well, at more than 6 feet tall and with a strong Hungarian accent, Lugosi was definitely the perfect choice for the Dracula, Count Dracula from Transylvania role. The film became very soon a very huge commercial success and went on to be regarded as a classic. In the year 2000, the United States Library of Congress selected it for preservation in the National Film Registry, calling it a culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant movie. Right? Well, during the 1930s and then later on the 1940s, monster horror movies were definitely a huge success. They were in vogue, with vampires definitely as popular characters and themes of these movies. Of course, Dracula sequels were filmed, including Dracula's Daughter, which was a movie that was based on a posthumously published Dracula story written by Bram Stoker. And then there was another sequel that was called The Son of Dracula, which stars Lon Chaney, for instance. Well, Lugosi himself, ladies and gentlemen, he starred in more vampire movies. He played in 1935 a vampire named Armand Tesla, not Dracula, again connected with the Balkans, in a movie that was called The Return of the Vampire. And then he played some other Dracula roles in a comedy horror film that was released in 1948. He tried actually during his career to break out of the horror genre, but he was so effective as Dracula, you know, that he wasn't cast in many other movies other than the Dracula's movies. So his screen appearances diminished. He died at the age of 73, and apparently he was buried with his famous Dracula cape. Right? Later on, I don't know if they stabbed him also in the hearts, you know, with something, or put some garlic in his pockets. Nevertheless, the Dracula movie mantle passed then to the English actor Christopher Lee, who portrayed Count Dracula in several Dracula movies, more or less between 1958 and 1974. Well, ladies and gentlemen, now let's see what it's all about, the historical Dracula. I'll try to be as brief as possible because I know that you heard a lot from the guides in Romania over there. But I have to mention that the real Vlad III Dracula, known also as Vlad the Impaler, he was a voivod. He was the prince of the Principality of Wallachia, the southern part of what is nowadays Romania. So this was the Principality of Wallachia. Right? This is the Principality of Wallachia. This is the Principality of Transylvania and the Principality of Moldavia. Right? So these three former principalities are forming nowadays Romania, or starting 1859, Wallachia and Moldavia got united, and then in 1918, at the end of the First World War, Transylvania also got united to the other two. So Vlad the Impaler, Vlad III Dracula, that was his official name, Vlad III Dracula. He was the 15th century prince, the warlord, the voivode of the Principality of Wallachia, and it happened that he was born in Transylvania. His father, Vlad II, right, he was also the Prince of Wallachia, so he was ruling the Principality of Wallachia. But over there, we remember for sure the stories from the guides in Bucharest and Romania. It was two bloodlines of princes that had that could claim the throne, and these two families have constantly fought over 500 years. And one family was supported once by the Western powers, by the German Emperor and the Hungarian Kingdom, and the other part was supported by the Ottomans, who all wanted to get there so that they have access to Western Europe, right? So Vlad II, who was the father of Vlad Dracula, right, the Vlad the Impaler, he was also the Prince of Wallachia, and at one certain point he was attacked by the Ottomans, and then he went in exile in Transylvania. And it was during this time when his father was in exile that Vlad the Impaler, Vlad III, was born in the town of Sighișoara, in that building that you see over there, the yellow big house over there. Well, this yellow big house shows a big plaque where it's written that here is the birthplace of Vlad III Dracula, Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Dracula. It's not actually, he was not actually born in that house. On the spot on which this house was built in the 17th century, so 1 century later, there used to be a wooden house where the guy was born. And if you look in the corner of the picture over there, right, you see another building, right? That's the German high school where I went to school. Close to the birthplace of Dracula. Well, Vlad II, ladies and gentlemen, the father of Vlad the Impaler, right, he was educated at the court of the German Emperor Sigismund of Luxembourg. And while being educated over there, like I said, it was the Western Christian powers that were supporting the families, and at the same time the other family was supported by the Sultan and by the Ottomans. So Vlad II, the father of Vlad the Impaler, well, he was educated, but his father had to sign a treaty with Sigismund of Luxembourg, according to which he's gonna fight the Ottomans and try to stop the Ottomans to go west, right, and capture Wallachia. So these three principalities were actually, during the entire Middle Ages, like a closed gate of the Christianity in front of the danger of the Muslims, right, and the Ottomans, the Turks. They have conquered us nowadays with the shawarmas and the kebabs. You'll see when if you continue from Budapest upstream, it's all over the place in Vienna, it's all over the place in Germany, it's everywhere. It's like almost traditional Bavarian foods, the shawarmas and the kebabs, right? Of the little businesses of the Ottomans. But we fought them for 500 years. And the grandfather of Vlad the Impaler, right, so the father of Vlad II, had to, in order to ensure the emperor that he's gonna keep his promise, he had to send his son to be raised at the emperor's court. So this is how Vlad II was raised over there, and he became a knight of the Dragon Order. And the Dragon Order was actually a union between Christian princes, kings and emperors. They all took a vow that they will fight against any peril that would endanger Christianity. The biggest peril at that time were the Ottomans, right? And all these members of the Dragon Order were wearing on their clothes the coat of arms of the order, which was a dragon. Well, in Romania, Wallachia, Transylvania, and Moldova, we do not have dragons in our mythology. Right? So when this guy came to take the throne, sent by the emperor, and he showed up with a costume having a dragon on the costume, the people said that he's wearing the devil on the costume. Because they didn't knew the dragons. We don't, like I said, we don't have them in our mythology. Okay? So they right away nicknamed him Vlad the Devil. The Romanian word for devil is Dracu. Because he had to wear the coat of arms of the dragon order, of whose order he was a knight, so he belonged to that order.
That's interesting.
Like the Templars were wearing the cross and so on, you know, they had to wear the dragon, but the people, the common people, thought that, oh, he's wearing, we have our prince is wearing the devil on his costume. So they called him Vlad the Dracu. When his son was born, right, he was called Vlad the Third Dracula. Why? Because if you're adding this, by adding this lea to Dracu, that means that in translation the name was Vlad the Third, the son of the devil. Because his father had the nickname Dracu, right? So he was the son of the guy that was nicknamed Dracu. Well, and that was very simple and enough for Bram Stoker, you know, to make the connection and just add a historical figure, you know, to a guy that was officially, his official name was Vlad the Third, the Dracula, or Dracula, very easy, Dracula, right? Well, now, he had a very turbulent life story. He fought against the Ottomans. He gained the jealousy of the Hungarian king Matthias Corvinus, who was his cousin actually, whose father Johannes of Hunyadi was regarded as the champion of Christianity after he managed to defend Belgrade and keep Belgrade in front of the Ottomans and chase away the Ottomans. By the way, you're aware that everyone in Europe, actually in the Christian world, every day at noontime, at 12, the bells of all the churches are rang, right? You know that. You know what's the reason? Well, after Johannes of Hunyadi, the father of Matthias Corvinus, managed to save Belgrade and chase away the Ottomans, the Pope declared him a champion of Christianity, right? And he gave an edict that all the churches have to ring the bells at noontime to celebrate his victory. And this is happening since 1450 something. Every single day, still nowadays, right? And the Catholic churches are doing it as well as the Orthodox churches are doing it as well. So, Johannes of Hunyadi was the father of Matthias Corvinus, the Hungarian king, right? And Vlad the Impaler was the cousin of Matthias Corvinus. So Matthias Corvinus was ruling the Hungarian kingdom, to whom also Transylvania belonged, or Transylvania was a principality that was a subject to the Hungarian kingdom. And then a guy of a little principality, Vlad the Impaler, because of being so crazy and fighting so crazy against the Ottomans, is declared by the Pope as the new champion of Christianity. Of course, that was something that was not very much appreciated by the Hungarian king. They had a treaty, so they couldn't get along more or less, and then the German merchants from southern part of Transylvania, they had privileges in Wallachia, they were tradesmen, and you know, as a payback they had to supply Vlad the Impaler whenever he was needing it with weapons and soldiers, which they didn't do, and then the guy went and punished them and burned several villages to the ground and killed everyone. So this was reported to the Hungarian king, and then the Hungarian king wrote a letter to the Pope just to make sure that he can somehow capture this guy and stop him being regarded as the the new champion of Christianity. So he was imprisoned also by Matthias Corvinus. So it was very many stories, cruel stories wrote about the guy. Well, some sides or one side was describing him or giving him a reputation as being a tyrant, you know, who took sadistic pleasure in torturing and killing his prisoners. It was artists from Western Europe that made secret portraits of the prince as an executioner, as you can see in the picture over there, or pardon me, a very cruel ruler. There were pamphlets that were published during his lifetime by the Germans. Then Russians, historians of the 16th century rewrote these pamphlets and these stories that were written in the 15th century and exaggerated them again. So, well, what it is now partly accepted is the fact that a big contribution had also the Hungarian king, who tried to describe him as cool as possible to the Pope. So this is the reason for which there are so many cruel stories about Vlad the Impaler, described that he's drinking the blood of his prisoners and so on. But all the stories were written read by Bram Stoker, right? He got all this information. Well, by contrast, on the other side, the Orthodox Christians, contemporaries, and then later on Romanian historians and Bulgarian poets, they all lauded him for fighting against the Ottoman Empire, and by some accounts he was regarded as a patriotic hero and harsh but fair, who reclaimed Wallachia from the Ottomans, but also from the corrupt aristocracy, the boyars, the nobility, right? So there were epic poems wrote about him since the 17th century onwards until nowadays. Well, today the revision of his story continues after the formation of the first Romanian states due to the unification of Wallachia and Moldavia in 1859. Vlad the Impaler became a national symbol, right? And he became, or he started to be regarded as a champion of independence. Many Romanian poets portrayed him as the country's first great hero. Then during the communist time, also the Communist Party and Ceausescu presented him as a national hero. At the same time, Vlad's connection to Dracula the vampire was presented and dismissed as Western sensationalism and decadence, right, by the communists and by Ceausescu. Well, modern popular books are also revising Vlad III's Dracula, Vlad the Impaler's reputation as a very cruel ruler. It was a work written signed by Radu Florescu and Raymond McNally that was published in 1972, which was the title was In Search of Dracula. And these two, they have explored the link between Bram Stoker's character vampire and Vlad III, Vlad the Impaler, the historical figure, focusing on his cruelty. It became definitely, the book became a bestseller, and it is considered to be actually the standard interpretation of the life and the times of the historical figure, of the historical prince Vlad the Impaler. There are some other Romanian historians that have stepped in with scholarly perspectives. Some of these theories are presenting Vlad the Impaler punishing actually ethnic groups in Wallachia according to the punishments they had in their own countries, right? And impaling was not a punishment that was typical for Wallachia. Impaling was a punishment that was typical for the Ottomans in the Ottoman Empire. So this is why the guy impaled the Turks, right? And while he was, beheading others or cutting the hands of others and so on, right? Well, and then, meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, the fascination with the fictional Dracula and vampires continues, in an unstoppable way. Vampire depictions include, of course, Anne's Rice, the Vampire Chronicles, with the first one, Interview with the Vampire. The series, the books, were transformed in a movie, Interview with the Vampire, starring Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, and then it was another one that was a total disappointment, The Queen of the Damned. The book is sensational, but the movie is a total disappointment. I can tell you, I was very much into this story. I'm not in the Dracula story, but when I was 17, I started to read the Chronicle of the Vampires, and between 17 and 19, I read them 7 times. It was like the Bible, Imagine me in a Transylvanian little village over there, where people have the traditions, me having long hair until here, so it was like this, like an Indian dressed in black reading the Chronicle of the Vampires. Crazy times over there. Well, then, ladies and gentlemen, of course, a modern depiction of Dracula, of Count Dracula, includes definitely Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, with a more evil Count. Well, do you remember Buffy? Do you remember Buffy the Vampire Slayer? Yeah, isn't it? So it changes, then it becomes something, the vampires become something good and romantic, even more in the Twilights, the book series, right? A series of books published in 2005. More than 100 million books were sold, right? I was already too old for the Twilight, so I read only the Chronicle of the Vampire. But nevertheless, they were translated in 40 languages, and then the books were made movies. So it was a series of romance fantasy movies. Well. Yet Dracula is not always portrayed as evil, right? Tortured or sexy. For kids, the vampire is also a lovable Muppet on Sesame Street, or it appears as a comical figure on a cereal box, right? And yes, ladies and gentlemen, we have a Dracula tourism in Romania and in Transylvania especially. This blend of history and fictional Dracula has become a major draw for Romanian tourism, for some of the tour operators over there. The fortified medieval castles and the buildings like those in Bran and Sighișoara, plus the mountains and the forests, the extensive forests over there, and the unusual architecture make Transylvania the ideal landscape for the original Dracula setting. The Dracula legend can be explored from the place where he was born in Sighișoara all the way to where he had the capital in Târgoviște, or to the island of Snagov, where apparently the guy is buried over there. I have a former colleague of mine who also was working as a program director, cruise manager for years on the ships. She has a sister that lives in Norway, and they opened together a tour operator company. So my former colleague runs the tours, Dracula tours in Transylvania, and the sister is selling them to Norwegian clients. But they do it they grew in the last years, incredible, They even had the grand-nephew of Bram Stoker being the host of one of these tours. I'm following her on Instagram, Well, I'm also tour operating over there. I'm on the other side. Because I run also culture tours, tailor-made for small groups, and motorcycle tours. And I have been invited in 2021 to write an article about my tours that was published in a motorcycle travel magazine in Australia that was called Traverse. And I have started, so my article that was supposed to be my advertising for Transylvania, an area that everyone knows because of Dracula. I called the article "You Won't Find Dracula There." This is how I started. Yeah, well, now, you know, that you know more about Dracula, you know, I hope that you have found the answers for some questions you maybe still had open, you know, on this topic after the days you have spent in Bucharest and maybe in Transylvania, you know. I also hope that that you're taking with you some great memories from over there, you know. And I hope that you're gonna spread the word around that Transylvania is not only about vampires and Dracula. Transylvania is totally something else, and I really do hope that you will really take in consideration to come back in the future sometime. You know, take a week. You need to take a week for Transylvania. If you have been only to Brasov and Bran, you just spotted what Transylvania can offer you. There are so many more other places that you have to visit over there. 3 or 4 more other cities, same beautiful as Brasov. Then plenty of German villages over there, then the Hungarian villages, then the villages in the northern part of Transylvania, so you can easily spend 1 week without having any encounter with any vampires over there, right? We do not have them other than for touristical purposes. I thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a lovely evening for everyone.